I am truly sorry. And I wish that you could find some way to forgive me.
Make this mainstream.
Welcome to WrestleMania!
In his final days, before the world was rocked with the devastating news of his death, Randy Savage, popularly known as Macho Man, made a shocking and heartbreaking request to his wife, Lynn Payne, and his family. And this revelation might just change how we see the Macho Man forever. To the world, he was the flamboyant wrestler who lit up the big screen every now and then. But in reality, Randy's life was a roller coaster of challenges, controversies, and tragedies. However, after his death, we finally know who Randy Savage really was behind the Macho Man persona. What shocking request did he make before his death? And what part of his life did he desperately try to hide from the public? The rise of a wrestling icon. Before he ever stepped into a wrestling ring wearing a bandana, colorful tights, and those unforgettable sunglasses, Randy Savage was just a young man who had a completely different dream. He was born Randy Mario Poffo on November 15, 1952, in Columbus, Ohio, and would go on to become the legendary Macho Man that the world would fall in love with. But as a child, he didn't want to be a wrestling legend. He wanted to play baseball. Many people don't know this, but Randy came from a wrestling family. His father, Angelo Poffo, was a well-known professional wrestler. But instead of following directly in his father's footsteps, Randy aimed for Major League Baseball. He was a gifted athlete from a young age, and he had the drive, the strength, and the discipline that made him stand out on the field. Randy played catcher in high school and later signed a minor league contract with the St. Louis Cardinals organization right after graduation. He wasn't just an average player. Randy was known for his intense work ethic, his focus on training, and constantly pushing himself beyond limits. He was so committed to baseball that he taught himself to throw with both arms, just in case an injury ever affected one side. But fate had other plans. During his time in the minor leagues, Randy suffered a serious shoulder injury, and despite his best efforts and eventual recovery, his career ended up stalling and suffering a decline. Most people would have given up, but not Randy. Instead, he decided to join his father in the family business, wrestling. And that's where the transformation really began. Randy reinvented himself completely by creating a wrestling character that would soon become larger than life. He became Macho Man, Randy Savage, but he didn't just step into the role, he became it. Everything about the Macho Man persona was carefully crafted. The colorful costumes, the feathered robes, the sunglasses, and the wild cowboy hats were all part of the image. He wanted fans to remember him the second he walked into the arena. And they did, because his look was impossible to forget. He had tassels hanging from his arms, glittering outfits, and an explosive energy that was just a performance. And then there was the iconic voice.
There's one guarantee in life, and that there are no guarantees, yeah.
Randy had a deep, raspy, gravel-coated voice that sounded like it came straight from a rock concert. Fans everywhere wondered where it came from, if it was real or an act, and the truth is, it was both. Randy actually developed the voice deliberately. It wasn't how he naturally spoke, but once he found it, he committed to it fully. Even off-camera, he often stayed in character, keeping the Macho Man voice going, as if he didn't know how to switch it off. And some say his natural voice slowly transformed into that deep, raspy voice permanently. As the 1980s rolled in, so did wrestling's golden era, and Randy Savage quickly found himself at the heart of it. When he joined Vince McMahon's World Wrestling Federation, he immediately stood out. His charisma was off the charts. Fans either loved him or loved to hate him. There was no middle ground. And in a world filled with wrestling giants like Hulk Hogan, Andre the Giant, and the Ultimate Warrior, Randy immediately carved out his own space as a top-tier performer. He wasn't just flashy, he could actually wrestle. His matches were technical, exciting, and packed with storytelling. One of his most iconic moments came at WrestleMania 4 in 1988 when he won the WWE Championship after defeating the $1 Million Man, Ted DiBiase. That night cemented his place at the top of the wrestling world. Randy Savage also had intense rivalries that defined his legacy. His feuds with Hulk Hogan, Jake the Snake Roberts, and Ric Flair weren't just physical battles. They turned out to be deeply personal storylines that fans followed closely. By the late 80s and early 90s, Randy Savage was more than just a wrestler. He had become a cultural icon. His face was on lunchboxes, action figures, and T-shirts. He was everywhere, and through it all, he stayed completely committed to the character he had built from scratch. But behind the flamboyant outfits and showmanship was a complex man with deep loyalty, unmatched drive, and a fierce desire to be remembered. But there was also a different side of Randy that was going through some deeply personal pain and struggles that the world could not see. The hidden pain behind the fame. For fans watching from the outside, Randy Macho Man Savage was the embodiment of energy, power, and confidence. On screen, he looked unstoppable. But behind the scenes was a man struggling to hold his world together. Randy's journey to fame had been intense, but staying at the top came with a cost. And that cost was often hidden in the shadows. As the 90s rolled in, Randy's relationship with the World Wrestling Federation, and especially with its founder, Vince McMahon, began to fracture. Savage had been one of the company's top stars for years. He had sold out arenas, moved merchandise, and brought unforgettable moments to fans worldwide. But wrestling is as much a business behind the curtain as it is in the ring, and Randy was caught in the web of backstage politics. He clashed with Vince McMahon on several occasions about creative direction, his role in the company, and his future. Randy didn't just want to be a commentator or a part-time attraction. He still saw himself as a top in-ring talent. He believed he had more to give. But Vince, on the other hand, disagreed. McMahon was beginning to invest in a new generation of stars, and to him, Savage's time in the spotlight had passed. The tension finally boiled over in 1994. After nearly a decade as one of the World Wrestling Federation's biggest names, Randy Savage left the company. But he didn't just walk away, he disappeared from the company entirely, and it was almost as if he had been erased overnight. And then, the rumors started. What exactly had the wrestling company done to Randy Savage? And what prompted him to leave the company without a proper goodbye? Some fans speculated that his fallout with Vince McMahon was personal and far deeper than a business disagreement. Some noted that his decision to leave the company had left McMahon very upset. Some rumors also noted that what worsened the feud was Randy's decision to move to another wrestling company, which Vince McMahon viewed as a close competition. Others noted that Randy also took the Slim Jim sponsorship with him to the new company, and this had made McMahon more upset. There were all kinds of wild theories, and no one ever confirmed anything concrete. But it was clear that Randy's departure wasn't just a career change. It was far deeper and more personal. But leaving WWE didn't bring an end to the challenges and struggles Randy had to deal with. As the years went on, the pressure of being Macho Man weighed heavily on him. Wrestling took a serious toll on his body. Like many wrestlers from his generation, he endured years of physical punishment. Long matches, grueling travel schedules, and no off-season meant his body was in a constant state of pain and recovery. But it wasn't just the physical wear and tear. Mentally, the spotlight was draining. Randy was expected to stay in character, stay strong, and stay visible. He didn't get to have bad days. He didn't get to show weakness. The fans constantly wanted the Macho Man, not Randy Poffo, and this divide between who he was and who he had to be became harder and harder to manage. Sadly, in WCW, Randy tried desperately and failed to reignite his career. He had some success, including more title wins and more TV time, but things never felt the same. The golden glow of the 80s was fading, and so was his spotlight. Behind the scenes, he struggled with aging out of the business he once dominated, and the reality of this left a long-lasting emotional scar. The Macho Man was still in there, but the world had changed. He began living a quieter life with less media and fewer public appearances. The loud voice that once filled arenas grew quieter, and the man who had once ruled wrestling's biggest stages was now slowly retreating from the public eye. It's easy to forget that the loudest voices sometimes carry the deepest wounds. Randy Savage was a showman, a warrior, and a legend, but he was also a man who lived with hidden pain for much of his life. But that pain didn't just come from the ring. Some of his deepest wounds came from love, and from the one woman who stood beside him through the highs and lows, only to be lost in the storm of fame. Before his final days, the Macho Man had already survived betrayals, backstage battles, and broken bones. But the one thing he probably never fully recovered from was the loss of her. Randy and Elizabeth's tragic love story. If you were a wrestling fan in the late 1980s, there was no love story more iconic, more captivating, or more bittersweet than that of Macho Man Randy Savage and Miss Elizabeth. They weren't just characters acting out wrestling storylines. They were a fairy tale couple in the eyes of millions, draped in glittering robes, walking hand in hand to the roar of the crowd. They looked like a king and queen ruling over the golden era of wrestling. But as perfect as it all seemed, behind the scenes, their love was complicated and far more tragic. Randy Savage and Elizabeth Hewlett met before the cameras ever started rolling. She wasn't just plucked out of nowhere to play his valet. Elizabeth was a real part of his world. When she made her WWE debut in 1985 as Savage's manager, fans were instantly hooked. She wasn't loud or flashy, but her grace and quiet strength created a beautiful contrast to Savage's wild intensity, and together they created magic. Fans watched them rise together. They saw Elizabeth stand by his side through countless rivalries and title matches. They cried when they were reunited at WrestleMania 7, in one of the most emotional moments in wrestling history. And in 1991, the couple got married in front of millions during WWE's Match Made in Heaven segment, an event that blurred the line between fiction and reality. But here's what many didn't realize. Randy and Elizabeth were already married long before that. The televised wedding was just for the cameras. In real life, they had tied the knot back in 1984. And just like any real marriage, theirs had its struggles that the fans never saw. Behind the scenes, their love story wasn't always so romantic. People backstage whispered about Randy being overly protective. Some said he was controlling. There were even stories of him refusing to let Elizabeth talk to other male wrestlers backstage. He didn't like her changing in the same locker rooms. He reportedly wanted to know where she was, who she was with, and what she was doing at all times. And this led to real-life tension with some colleagues, including Hulk Hogan. While fans loved watching Hulk Hogan and Randy Savage battle it out in the ring, most people didn't know that their real-life friendship was full of tension, and much of it had to do with Miss Elizabeth. Their on-screen feuds were legendary, but behind the scenes, things were often just as heated. One of the most talked-about incidents happened during a show in Paris. There were no steps leading up to the ring, and when it came time for Miss Elizabeth to enter, Hogan lifted her up by her armpits to help her in. To most, it looked harmless, maybe even gentlemanly, but to Randy, it was something else entirely. He misinterpreted Hogan's gesture as too close, and he felt disrespected, as though Hogan had crossed a personal line with his wife. The misunderstanding reportedly turned into a serious backstage argument. However, both men eventually apologized to each other and moved forward professionally, but the moment left a lasting crack in their friendship. For years after that, there was distance between Hogan and Savage, both personally and publicly. But later in life, the two men unexpectedly ran into each other, and rather than more tension, it led to a heartfelt reunion. Whatever bad blood had once been there was finally buried. And Hogan would later say he was grateful they had that moment of peace, because not long after, Randy was gone. Some colleagues saw Randy's protectiveness of Elizabeth as nothing more than an act of care, but to some others it felt suffocating. Unfortunately, their relationship began to show cracks, even as their characters stayed united in front of fans. There were arguments, long silences, and moments where Elizabeth seemed distant. According to their colleagues, Elizabeth was tired of the pressure that came with such a demanding career. Randy, on the other hand, was also dealing with the growing pressure of fame and didn't know how to handle it without lashing out at the people closest to him. By the early 1990s, things had reached a breaking point, and in 1992, Randy and Elizabeth officially divorced. For Randy, the divorce hit hard. Not only had he lost his partner in life, he'd also lost his partner in the ring. Their bond had been the heart of his character for years. Elizabeth, too, struggled after the split. She stepped away from the spotlight for a while, but eventually returned to wrestling in a different company. There, she tried to start fresh. But things were never the same. Then came the tragedy that would haunt Randy for the rest of his life. On May 1st, 2003, Miss Elizabeth was found dead in her home in Georgia. The cause was an accidental overdose of medication and alcohol. She was only 42 years old. News of her death shocked the wrestling world and crushed Randy Savage. Randy never spoke much publicly about her death, but those close to him said it devastated him, and some insider reports claim that he blamed himself for how things ended, for how he'd treated her, and for not being there when she needed someone the most. For years after, Randy seemed adrift. He made fewer appearances, and he seemed tired, not physically, but emotionally. Then, unexpectedly, something changed. In 2010, Randy Savage got married again, this time to his high school sweetheart, Lynn Payne. It was a quiet and simple ceremony between two people who had reconnected later in life. Lynn wasn't part of the wrestling world and wasn't used to the spotlight or the pressure. And maybe that's exactly what Randy needed. Lynn brought him peace and gave him a sense of calm that had been missing for years. With her, he wasn't Macho Man. He was just Randy Poffo. And for a little while he found happiness again, but he never truly outran the heartbreak of his past. And as time passed, the world began to notice something different about Randy. Little by little, he began slowing down and pulling back from the spotlight, and what followed after would leave fans completely heartbroken. The final days of Randy Savage. In the last years of his life, Randy Savage had largely disappeared from the public spotlight. The flamboyant Macho Man character, once one of the most electric figures in professional wrestling, had settled into a quieter, more private routine. Gone were the loud promos, the explosive entrances, and the high-flying elbow drops. In their place was tranquility, marriage, and reflection. After stepping away from the wrestling world in the early 2000s, Randy chose not to chase TV deals or live on nostalgia tours like many of his peers. Instead, He embraced a much slower pace of life. He spent time with his wife, Lynn Payne, and enjoyed life in Florida, far away from the chaos of the ring. For someone who had lived most of his adult life in the spotlight, this period of peace seemed almost like a second chapter. But behind that peaceful surface, Randy was quietly dealing with health issues that would ultimately become fatal. While he never made his condition public, close family members and medical examiners would later reveal that he had developed heart problems. Randy had always taken pride in his athleticism. From his early days as a baseball player to his wrestling career, fitness was part of his identity. But like many wrestlers of his era, years of physical stress, intense performances, and the mental toll of the industry had left their mark. And on May 20th, 2011, everything changed. That morning, Randy and his wife Lynn were in their car driving in Seminole, Florida, when Randy suddenly turned to Lynn and said he wasn't feeling well. According to reports, he told her something as simple and alarming as, "I don't feel too good." In the moments that followed, Randy suffered a massive heart attack behind the wheel. It happened so quickly that there was little time to react. He lost consciousness and control of the car. What happened next could have been far worse, but thanks to Lynn's quick thinking, it wasn't. As the car veered off the road, Lynn managed to take control of the steering wheel. Investigators later confirmed that she swerved the vehicle away from oncoming traffic and guided it into a tree, minimizing the impact. Her calmness in that chaotic moment likely saved her life and prevented further tragedy. Emergency responders arrived shortly after. Randy was taken to Largo Medical Center, but it was too late. The heart attack had been sudden and severe. Randy Poffo was pronounced dead at the age of 58. Lynn thankfully survived the crash with only minor injuries. However, she was left heartbroken and stunned by the loss of her husband. In the days following his death, the Pinellas Pasco Medical Examiner's Office confirmed the cause of death as atherosclerotic heart disease. This is a common form of heart disease caused by the buildup of plaque in the arteries, which can lead to sudden and fatal heart attacks. The autopsy report also stated that Randy had enlarged arteries and significant heart damage, indicating that the condition had likely been developing over time, possibly without him fully realizing how serious it was. Importantly, the toxicology report also noted that his death was not caused by illicit substances. This was a key point, especially in the world of professional wrestling, where many untimely deaths are linked to substance abuse. Randy had not only been clean, but also appeared to be living a relatively healthy life in his final years. His sudden passing sent shockwaves through the wrestling community. Though Randy had not been actively wrestling for several years, his legacy was still massive. Wrestlers, fans, and former colleagues poured out tributes on social media and television. Hulk Hogan, with whom Savage had a famously rocky relationship, tweeted that he was devastated by the loss and said he was praying for Randy's family. Other wrestling legends like Bret Hart, Chris Jericho, and CM Punk expressed their admiration and shared personal stories about how much Randy had influenced them. Even WWE, which had largely kept Savage out of its spotlight due to past tensions, honored him on their platforms. Vince McMahon issued a statement expressing sadness over the loss and acknowledging Savage's contributions to the company's success during its most important years. For fans, the suddenness of his death made it all the more heartbreaking. Randy had just begun to enjoy a chapter of life where he was no longer burdened by fame, conflict, or the pressures of performance. He had found love again. He had found peace. And just like that, he was gone. But in the midst of it all, fans were shocked to learn that in his final days, Randy had made one final request to his wife and family concerning his passing. Randy's final wish. After Randy Savage's sudden passing in May 2011, the wrestling world was left reeling. Fans across generations mourned the loss of one of the industry's most unforgettable icons. From the moment his raspy voice first hit TV screens to the countless championship matches he delivered with unmatched energy, Savage had earned a place in wrestling history. But in the quiet aftermath of his death, people also began to learn more about who Randy was beyond the Macho Man persona. The first person to speak publicly and in depth was his younger brother, Lanny Poffo. Lanny, a former wrestler himself, who performed under the name The Genius, had always been close to Randy. They came from a tight-knit wrestling family, sons of Angelo Poffo, a respected pro wrestler and promoter. While Randy became a larger-than-life superstar, Lanny remained more low-key, often acting as his brother's confidant behind the scenes. In several interviews following Randy's death, Lanny opened up about Randy's private side that fans rarely saw. According to Lanny, Randy had grown deeply reflective in his final years. He had stepped away from the spotlight and was enjoying a slower, quieter life with his wife, Lynn. He wasn't chasing fame anymore. He was gardening, walking on the beach, and focusing on the things that truly mattered to him, like family, peace, and nature. One of the most touching revelations Lanny shared was about Randy's final wish, and it had nothing to do with wrestling. Randy had told Lanny that when he died, he didn't want a flashy funeral or a massive ceremony. He wanted something simple, personal, and close to his heart. Specifically, Randy had asked for his ashes to be scattered under a tree near where his beloved dog, Hercules, was buried. Hercules wasn't just a pet. He was family. Randy had been incredibly close to the dog and was heartbroken when Hercules passed away. That bond shaped how he viewed death. He didn't want to be remembered in a wrestling ring. He wanted to be at rest in nature, in peace, beside his loyal companion. Lanny and Randy's wife, Lynn, honored his request. Randy's ashes were cremated and scattered in the exact spot he had asked for, beneath a tree on family property in Largo, Florida, where Hercules had been laid to rest years before. This deeply personal gesture revealed a different side of Randy. The world knew Macho Man, with the wild voice, the sequins, and the sunglasses. But behind all that was a man who valued loyalty, love, and simplicity. A man who wanted to be remembered not for fame, but for the quiet life he found after the chaos. As tributes continued to pour in, more people shared stories that painted a fuller picture of Randy's character. Fellow wrestlers described him as intense and passionate, but also generous. Despite his sometimes guarded nature, Randy had a strong sense of responsibility. He was fiercely loyal to people he trusted, often going out of his way to help younger wrestlers behind the scenes. Fans, too, began to open up about their encounters with Randy. Many said he was kind, respectful, and surprisingly soft-spoken when not performing. He signed autographs patiently. He never turned away a fan. And he never forgot that without the audience, there was no Macho Man. Lanny also revealed something else that surprised many. Randy had turned down a WWE Hall of Fame induction during his lifetime. And it wasn't because of the way he left the company or because he felt unworthy. It was because he wanted to be inducted alongside his father and brother as a family. WWE reportedly didn't agree to that request at the time. Eventually, in 2015, years after his death, Randy Macho Man Savage was officially inducted into the WWE Hall of Fame, and Lanny accepted the honor on his brother's behalf. It was an emotional moment. Fans cheered. Fellow wrestlers stood and applauded. But in a way, Randy had already found his own kind of peace. He had made peace with his past. He had rediscovered love. And he had left behind the spotlight for a life that was quieter. Randy Savage wasn't perfect. He had his flaws, like anyone else. But in the end, he was more than a wrestling legend. He was a man who loved and held his family close. He once roared into arenas with larger-than-life energy, but his final chapter ended not in a ring, but beneath a tree, beside a dog he loved, with the wind gently moving through the leaves. In the end, Randy Savage's death was a reminder that even the strongest, most seemingly invincible figures are still human. What's your favorite memory of the Macho Man? Tell us in the comments section below. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to click on the next video on your screen, like this video, and subscribe to our channel for more updates.